All right, Chapter 22. In the house at 27 Rue du Helder in Paris, to which Albert de Morcerf had invited the Count of Monte Cristo, preparations were being made on the morning of May 21 to receive the guest. Albert de Morcerf lived in a house situated at one corner of a large courtyard. Only two of its windows overlooked the street. Three others faced the courtyard, and two others the back of the garden. Between the courtyard and the garden stood the spacious and fashionable residence of the Count and Countess of Morcerf, built in the unsightly imperial style. In this choice of a house for Albert, it was easy to discern the tactful foresight of a mother who, not wishing to be separated from her son, had nevertheless realized that a young man of his age needs to be completely free. On the morning of the appointment, Albert was sitting in his small drawing room on the ground floor. At 9:45, his valet entered with several newspapers, which he laid on a table, and a bundle of letters, which he handed to Albert. "What time would you like lunch, sir?" asked the valet. "At exactly 10:30. I don't have much confidence in the Count's promise, but at least I want to be sure of fulfilling my end of the bargain." The valet withdrew. Albert threw himself on the divan, took up the newspapers, looked at the theatre page, made a grimace of distaste on learning that an opera, not a ballet, was to be given that night, and finally cast aside, one after the other, the three most widely read newspapers of Paris. "These newspapers become more boring every day," he muttered, in the middle of a prolonged yawn. Alright, so remember Albert is party boy that the Count purposefully wanted to get close to, and we will find out how he works into the Count's plan, no? What motive does the Count have in really getting close to this young man? Alright, hold on, I'm gonna turn on my lamp because it's so dark and my eyes are starting to hurt. Hold on. Oh my, so much better. Okay. Oh, my phone. I'm sorry. I'm gonna click Do Not Disturb. Alright. Just then, a light carriage stopped before the door, and an instant later, Albert's valet returned to announce Monsieur Lucien Debray. A tall, pale, fair-haired young man with self-confident gray eyes and thin, cold lips walked into the room without speaking or smiling. "Good morning, Lucien," said Albert. "Your punctuality is almost frightening. I expected you to be the last to arrive, but you're the first one, and you're even ahead of time. It's miraculous. Has the ministry been overthrown by any chance?" "No, don't worry, we're always tottering, but we never fall." "Monsieur Beauchamp," announced the valet. Come in, mighty pen," said Albert, standing up and stepping forward to meet the young man. "Look, here's Debray, who detests you without reading what you write, or at least so he says." "He's quite right," said Beauchamp. "He's like me. I criticize him without knowing what he's doing. Good morning." The minister's secretary and the journalist exchanged a handshake and a smile. "We're waiting for only two more people now," said Albert, "and we'll sit down to table as soon as they arrive." "What sort of people are they?" asked Beauchamp. "A gentleman and a diplomat." "That means waiting about 2 hours for the gentleman and a little longer for the diplomat." "Not at all," said Albert. "We'll have lunch at exactly 10:30, come what may." "Monsieur de Chateau-Renaud and Monsieur Maximilien Morel," announced the valet. "Ah, now we're all here," said Beauchamp. "Those are the two people you were waiting for, aren't they, Albert?" "Morel," murmured Albert, surprised. "Morel? Who's that?" But before he had finished speaking, Monsieur de Chateau-Renaud, a handsome young man of 30, and a gentleman to his fingertips, took Albert's hand and said to him, "Allow me to introduce Captain Maximilien Morel, my friend, and what's more, my savior. Salute my hero, Vicomte." He stepped aside to allow Albert to see the tall, noble young man with a wide forehead, piercing eyes, and black moustache, whom the reader will remember having seen in Marseille in circumstances dramatic enough to prevent him from being forgotten. A handsome uniform, half French and half Oriental, set off his broad chest decorated with the Cross of the Legion of Honor. The young officer bowed with easy politeness. He was graceful in every movement because he was strong. Okay, so Maximilien Morel is the son of Monsieur Morel. Monsieur de Chateau-Renaud knew in advance what pleasure it would give me to make your acquaintance, said Albert with friendly courtesy. You're his friend already, now become mine. Very good, said Chateau-Renaud, and I hope, Vicomte, that if the occasion should arise, he'll do the same thing for you as he did for me. What did he do? Asked Albert. Oh, said Maximilian, it's hardly worth mentioning. The Baron is exaggerating. What? Exclaimed the Baron of Chateau-Renaud. It's not worth mentioning. In that case, life isn't worth mentioning. It seems clear to me, Baron, that Captain Morel once saved your life. That's absolutely correct. How did it happen? Asked Beauchamp. Well, as you all know, I once took it into my head to make a trip to Africa, began Chateau-Renaud, and since it seemed a shame to let my talents go to waste, I decided to try out my 2 new pistols on the Arabs. So I set sail for Oran. From there I went to Constantinople and arrived just in time to see the siege abandoned. I began to retreat along with the others. For 48 hours I endured the rain during the day and the snow at night. But on the 3rd morning my poor horse died of cold, and I had to continue the retreat on foot. Suddenly I saw 6 Arabs galloping toward me to cut off my head. I shot 2 of them with my rifles and 2 with my pistols, but there were still more of them, and none of my guns were loaded. One of them seized me by the hair. That's why I wear it short now. You never know what may happen, and the other put his sword to my throat. I could already feel the cold steel when the gentleman you see here came charging down on them, shot the one holding me by the hair, and split the other one's head with his saber. Captain Morel had set himself the task of saving a man's life on that particular day, and as chance would have it, I was the man. Yes, said Maximilian, it was the 5th of September, which is the anniversary of a day when my father was miraculously saved. As far as it's within my power, I try to celebrate that day every year by performing some heroic action, isn't that right? Interrupted Chateau-Renaud. The story to which Captain Morel is alluding is an extremely interesting one, which he'll tell you some day when you know him better. But for now, let's fill our stomachs and not our memories. What time are we having lunch, Albert? At 10:30. Exactly, asked Debray, taking out his watch. Oh, you'll allow me 5 minutes, Grace, said Albert, because I'm expecting a savior too. Whose savior? Mine, of course. Did you think I couldn't be saved like anyone else, and that the Arabs were the only ones who cut off heads? I was in Rome for the carnival this year, and we know that, said Beauchamp. Yes, but what you don't know is that I was seized by bandits. There are no bandits, said Debray. Why don't you admit that your cook is late and that, like Madame de Maintenon, you're about to give us a story instead of food? We're all amiable enough to forgive you and listen to your story, fantastic though it promises to be. I'll tell you the story, but fantastic though it may be, I swear it's true from beginning to end. The bandits seized me and took me off to a very gloomy place known as the Catacombs of Saint Sebastian. I'm so sorry, my neighbor is a gamer and he's really loud, so I'm sorry if you hear that in the background. They announced to me that I was being held for a ransom of 4,000 piastres. Unfortunately, though, I had only 1,500 with me. It was toward the end of my stay in Italy, and my letter of credit was almost exhausted. I wrote a note to Franz. Oh yes, Franz was there, so if you like, you can write to him and ask him whether I'm lying or not. I wrote to Franz that if the 4,000 piastres hadn't arrived by 6 o'clock in the morning, I would soon go to join the glorious martyrs in whose company I had the honor to find myself. And I can assure you that Monsieur Luigi Vampa, that's the name of the chief of the bandits, would have scrupulously kept his word. And so Franz arrived with the 4,000 piastres? Asked Chateau-Renaud. No, he simply came accompanied by the gentleman I am expecting soon, and whom I hope to introduce to you. He spoke a few words to the bandit chief, and I was set free. And I suppose they even apologized for having seized you, remarked Beauchamp. Yes, they did just that, said Albert. Why, it must have been Ariosto himself. No, he's simply the Count of Monte Cristo. There is no Count of Monte Cristo, said Debray. I don't think there is, added Chateau-Renaud, with the conviction of a man who has the whole of European nobility at his fingertips. Has anyone ever heard of a Count of Monte Cristo anywhere? Perhaps he comes from the Holy Land, said Beauchamp. One of his ancestors may have owned a Calvary, as the Montmartres once owned the Dead Sea. Excuse me, said Maximilian. Perhaps I can clear up the matter for you. Monte Cristo is the name of a little island which I've often heard my father's sailors speak of. It's a grain of sand in the middle of the Mediterranean. That's right, said Albert, and the man I'm telling you about is the king and master of that grain of sand. He probably bought his title of count somewhere in Tuscany, but that doesn't change the fact that my Count of Monte Cristo exists. Everybody exists. There's nothing astonishing about that. Everybody exists, it's true, but not the way he does. That man has often made me shudder. One day, for example, we were watching an execution together, and I thought I was about to faint. But it was more from seeing him and listening to him talk coldly about all the tortures on earth than it was from watching the executioner carry out his duties and listening to the cries of the condemned man. After he saved your life, did he make you sign a contract written on flame-colored parchment in which you surrendered your soul to him? Go on, laugh, said Albert, somewhat nettled. Laugh as much as you like, gentlemen, when I look at you dapper Parisians, accustomed to the Boulevard de Gand and your promenades in the Bois de Boulogne, and when I think of that man, it seems to me you're not of the same species. Thank you, I'm flattered, said Beauchamp. Nevertheless, added Chateau Renaud, your Count of Monte Cristo is no doubt a gallant man, except for his little arrangements with Italian bandits. There are no Italian bandits, said Debray, and no Count of Monte Cristo either, added Beauchamp. Listen, the clock just struck 10:30. Admit it was all nothing but a nightmare, and let's have lunch, said Beauchamp. But the vibrations of the clock had scarcely died away when the door opened and the valet announced, His Excellency the Count of Monte Cristo. No one had heard the sound of a carriage in the streets, or of footsteps in the antechamber. Even the door had opened noiselessly. The Count appeared in the doorway dressed with the greatest simplicity, but the most exacting dandy who could have found no fault with his apparel. He smiled and walked towards Albert, who eagerly came forward and shook his hand. Count, said Albert, I was just announcing your visit to some of my friends whom I've invited here for this occasion, and whom I would now like to introduce to you. This is the Count of Chateau Renaud, whose nobility goes back to the 12 peers, and whose ancestors had seats at the Round Table. Monsieur Lucien Debray, secretary to the Minister of the Interior, Monsieur Beauchamp, a formidable journalist and the terror of the French government, and finally Monsieur Maximilien Morel, captain of spies. At this last name, the Count, who had until then had bowed courteously but coldly and impassively, involuntarily took a step forward, and his pale cheeks flushed slightly. You wear the uniform of the new French conquerors, he said. It's a handsome uniform. Yes, said Albert, and beneath that uniform beats one of the bravest hearts in the French army. Oh, Monsieur de Morcerf, interrupted Maximilien. Let me speak, Captain. We've just learned, continued Albert, that Monsieur Morel has performed such a heroic deed that although I saw him for the first time only today, I would like to ask him the favor of allowing me to present him to you as one of my friends. Ah, Captain Morel has a noble heart, said the Count. So much the better. This exclamation, which was prompted by the Count's own thoughts rather than by what Albert had just said, surprised everyone, especially Maximilien himself, who looked at Monte Cristo in amazement. Gentlemen, said Albert, my valet tells me that lunch is ready. Allow me to show you the way, Count. They all passed into the dining room, and each man took his place. The Count was, as we have already noted, a very moderate eater. Albert noticed this and said, I'm afraid, Count, that our French food may not please you. I ought to have asked you about your taste and prepared something more to your liking. If you know me better, replied the Count, smiling, you wouldn't trouble yourself about a matter which has so little importance for a traveller who, like myself, has lived on macaroni in Naples, polenta in Milan, olla podrida in Valencia, carrick in India, pilau in Constantinople, and swallows' nests in China. I eat everything and everywhere, but I eat little. And today, when you reproach me for my moderation, I happen to have a good appetite, for I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. What? Since yesterday morning? Exclaimed the guests. You haven't eaten for 24 hours? No, replied Monte Cristo. I was a little behind schedule on my journey here, so I didn't want to stop. Didn't you eat in your carriage? Asked Albert. No, I slept as I usually do when I'm bored and don't have the energy to amuse myself, or when I'm hungry and have the desire to eat. Can you go to sleep at will? Asked Albert. More or less. Do you have a recipe for that? Yes, an infallible one. Might we know what it is? Asked Debray. Certainly, said Monte Cristo. I make no secret of it. It's a mixture of some excellent opium for which I made a special trip to Canton in order to get the purest quality, and of the best hashish grown in the Orient. You mix these two ingredients in equal proportions and make them into pills, which you swallow when you need them. The effect is produced within 10 minutes. But, said Beauchamp, who as a journalist was extremely incredulous, do you carry this drug with you at all times? At all times, replied Monte Cristo. Would it be indiscreet to ask to see those precious pills? Continued Beauchamp, hoping to trip him up. Not at all, said the Count, and he drew from his pocket a marvelous case formed from a single hollowed-out emerald. Inside it were 5 or 6 greenish little balls about the size of a pea. They gave off an acrid, penetrating odor. The case was passed around the table, but the guests were much more interested in the amazing emerald from which it was made than in the pills it contained. That's a magnificent emerald, said Chateau Renaud, and the largest one I ever saw. I had 3 like it, said Monte Cristo. I gave one of them to the Grand Signor, who had mounted on his sword, and the other to His Holiness the Pope, who had it set in his tiara opposite another emerald, similar but not so beautiful, which was given to its predecessor Pius VII by the Emperor Napoleon. I kept the 3rd one for myself and had hollowed it out, which took away half its value, but made it more adapted to the use I wanted to make of it. Everyone looked at Monte Cristo in amazement. He spoke so simply that it was obvious that he was either mad or was telling the truth. The emerald, which they had all held in their own hands, made them inclined to believe he was telling the truth. "And what did those 2 sovereigns give you in exchange for your magnificent gift?" asked Debray. "The Grand Signor gave me a woman's freedom," replied the Count, "and His Holiness gave me a man's life." "Peppino was the man whose life you saved, wasn't he?" cried Albert. "Perhaps," said Monte Cristo, smiling. "You have no idea how delighted I am to hear you speak this way, Count," said Albert. "I've described you to my friends as a fabulous man, a wizard out of the Arabian Nights, a sorcerer out of the Middle Ages, but Parisians are so subtle in paradoxes that they take the most incontestable truths for caprices of the imagination when these truths don't fit into their everyday lives. Please tell these gentlemen yourself, Count, that I was seized by Italian bandits, and that without your generous intervention I'd probably be awaiting the Last Judgment in the catacombs of Saint Sebastian today, instead of entertaining them in my humble little house. And please tell me also, for my own information, how you managed to inspire such respect in the bandits of Rome, who respect so few things. France and I were overcome with admiration." "I've known the famous Luigi Vampa for over 10 years, said the Count. "One day when he was a young boy and still a simple shepherd, I gave him a gold coin for showing me my way, and, in order not to be under any obligation to me, he gave me a dagger which he had carved himself and which you must have seen in my collection of weapons. Years later, whether because he had forgotten that exchange of gifts, which ought to have made us friends, or because he didn't recognize me, he tried to capture me, but it was I who captured him, along with a dozen or so of his men. I could have turned him over to Roman justice, which is quite expeditious, oh my gosh, this word, expeditious, and would have acted still more promptly in his case, but I did not. I released him and all his men." "On condition that they sin no more," said the journalist, laughing. I'm glad to see they've scrupulously kept their word." "No," replied the Count, "only on condition that they always respect me and my friends, which is why I was able to deliver our host from their hands. Furthermore, Monsieur de Morcerf, as I've already told you, I had an ulterior motive in saving you. I wanted to call on you to introduce me into Paris society when I visited friends. You may have considered that a passing fancy at the time, but today it's a reality to which you must submit under pain of breaking your word." "I'll keep my word," said Albert, "but I'm afraid you may be quite disappointed. You're accustomed to splendid scenery, picturesque events, and fantastic horizons, while France is such a prosaic country and Paris is such a civilized city that there's only one service I can render you, and for which I'm entirely at your disposal: to introduce you everywhere or have you introduced by my friends. I don't dare suggest that you share my lodgings as I shared yours in Rome, for there isn't room for a shadow here unless it's the shadow of a woman." "Ah, yes," said the Count. "In Rome you mentioned something about the possibility of a marriage when you return to Paris. Are you congratulations in order?" "Nothing is definite yet, but I hope before long to be able to introduce to you You two, if not my wife, at least my fiancée, Mademoiselle Eugene Danglars. Okay, this book. Alright, so guys, I know this book is tiring. I know there's so many details, there's so many people, and it's a tiring book to read. Even me reading it out loud, I find it tiring, no? Honestly, it's hard work to read this book. However, once it starts to pay off, it starts to pay off. Once you're introduced to so many characters, but then you realize that these characters are connected to each other, that's when this book gets so much, it becomes so much fun good. And Albert de Morcerf, the one the Count saved, the one the Count was very nice to in Rome, no, the one he saved from the bandits, we now find out that he is engaged to Mademoiselle Eugene Danglars, who is the daughter of Danglars, one of the enemies of Edmond Dantes, no, one of the reasons, one of the people who put Edmond Dantes in prison, one of the people who framed Edmond Dantes. So already there's a connection, and you're already like, what is the Count planning? What does the Count have planned, no? But now we see there's a connection. Albert de Morcerf is engaged to Mademoiselle Eugene Danglars, the daughter of Danglars. Eugene Danglars, said the Count. Let's see now, isn't her father Baron Danglars? Yes, do you know him? I don't know him, said the Count indifferently, but I probably won't be long in making his acquaintance, because I have an account opened with him through the firms of Richard and Blount of London, Arstein and Escalès of Vienna, and Thomson and French of Rome. As he spoke these last words, Monte Cristo looked at Maximilian Morel out of the corner of his eye. The young man started as though he had received an electric shock. Thomson and French, he exclaimed. Do you know that firm? They're my bankers in Rome, said the Count calmly. Could I be of service to you with them? Perhaps you might help us learn something we've never been able to learn. That firm once rendered a great service to ours, but for some reason they've always denied doing so. I'll be glad to help you in any way I can, Captain, said the Count. Just a moment, said Albert. We've strayed pretty far from our subject. We were about to discuss finding a suitable house for the Count of Monte Cristo. Come, gentlemen, let's put our heads together. Where shall we lodge this new guest of the city of Paris? In the Faubourg Saint-Germain, said Chateau Renaud. He'll find a charming little house with a courtyard and garden there. You don't know anything but your gloomy Faubourg Saint-Germain, said Debray. Don't listen to him, Count. Take a house on the Chasseau d'Antin. It's the real center of Paris. No, on the Boulevard de l'Opéra, said Beauchamp. You'll see the whole city of Paris parade before your eyes there. What about you, Morel? Said Chateau Renaud. Don't you have any ideas on the subject? Yes, I do, said the young man, smiling, but I was expecting the Count to be tempted by one of the brilliant prospects which have just been described to him. Since he's given no answer, however, I think I can allow myself to offer him a suite in a charming little house my sister has been renting for the past year in the Rue Meslay. You have a sister? Asked Monte Cristo. Yes, and an excellent one. Married? She's been married for 9 years. Is she happy? As happy as a human creature is allowed to be. She married the man she loved, the man who remained faithful to us in our misfortune, Emmanuel Herbaut. I'm staying with them during my leave. My brother-in-law and I are at your disposal, Count. Thank you, Captain. I'll content myself with being introduced to your sister and your brother-in-law, if you'll be so kind as to do me that honor. But the reason I didn't accept the suggestion of any of these gentlemen is that I already have a house. I sent my valet on ahead of me, and he should have bought me a house and had it furnished by now. I presume your valet knows Paris, then, said Beauchamp. This is the first time he's ever been in France, and he can't speak. Is it Ali? Asked Albert in the midst of the general surprise. That's right, Ali, my mute Nubian. You saw him in Rome, I believe. Yes, replied Albert, I remember him perfectly, but how could you have sent a Nubian to buy you a house in Paris, and a mute to furnish it for you? He's sure to have done everything all wrong, poor fellow. On the contrary, I'm sure he's chosen everything according to my taste. As you know, my tastes aren't like those of everyone else. He arrived here a week ago, and he no doubt went over the entire city with the instinct of a good hunting dog. He knows all my whims, preferences, and needs, and I'm sure he's arranged everything to my liking. He knew I'd arrive today at 10 o'clock, and he was waiting for me at the Barrière de Fontainebleau to give me this piece of paper. It's my new address. Here, read it. Monte Cristo handed the piece of paper to Albert. 30 Champs Elysees, read Albert. Now that's really original, exclaimed Beauchamp. And very princely, added Chateau Renaud. Do you mean to say you don't know anything about your own house yet? Asked Debray. No, said Monte Cristo. I didn't want to be late for my appointment here, so I changed clothes in my carriage and came directly to Monsieur de Morcerf's door. The young men looked at one another. They were not sure whether Monte Cristo was joking or not, but he spoke in such a simple and direct manner that it was impossible to suppose that he was lying. Besides, why should he be lying? I see we'll have to be content with rendering the Count the little services that are within our power, said Beauchamp. As a journalist, I can open all the theatres in Paris to him. Thank you, said Monte Cristo, smiling, but I've already ordered my steward to reserve me a box in each one of them. Is your steward also a mute Nubian? Asked Debray. No, he's not. I believe you know him, Monsieur Morcerf. Is he by any chance that worthy Signor Bertuccio who is such an expert at renting windows? Precisely. He's a fine man who was once a soldier and also a smuggler. In fact, he's been just about everything a man can be. I wouldn't even swear that he wasn't once mixed up with the police over some stabbing. Well then, said Chateau Renaud, you have a complete household. You have a house and the Champs Elysees, servants and a steward. All you need now is a mistress. I have something better than that, said Monte Cristo. I have a slave. You rent your mistresses at the opera house or the theatre. I bought mine in Constantinople. I had to pay more, but I now have nothing to worry about on that score. But you're forgetting, said Debray, that your slave became free the moment she set foot on French soil. Who will tell her that? Asked Monte Cristo. Why, the first person she sees. She speaks nothing but modern Greek. Ah, that's different. Will we see her at least? Asked Beauchamp. Or, since you have a mute, do you also have eunuchs? No, I don't carry Orientalism that far, asked Monte Cristo. Everyone around me is free to leave me, and on leaving me will have no further need of me or anyone else. Perhaps that's why no one leaves me. They had long since passed to desserts and cigars. It's 2:30, said Debray, standing up. Your guest is charming, Albert, but sooner or later one must leave even the best of company. It's time for me to return to the ministry. As Beauchamp was about to leave, he said to Albert, Well, I won't go to the chamber today. I have something better for my readers than a speech by Monsieur Danglars. Please, Beauchamp, said Albert, not a word, I beg you. Don't deprive me of the distinction of presenting the Count and explaining him. Isn't he a strange man? He's more than that, said Chateau Renaud. He's one of the most extraordinary men I've ever seen. Are you coming, Morel? As soon as I give the Count my card, he's promised to pay me a visit. And you may be sure I will, said the Count. Maximilian Morel went out with Chateau Renaud, leaving Monte Cristo alone with Albert de Morcerf. Okay, so the Count is he's so bad vibes. Like, he's so rich, but he's so like, oh yeah, I have a female slave, and oh yeah, I have like a mute ethnic man who's working for me. I have a servant, I have a slave. Like, he's so rich and he's so braggy and he's so, I don't know, he's so bad vibes, and like he's such a villain. That's your feeling when you're reading it. No, he's such a villain. He's so sleazy. He seems like such a bad guy. Oh man, and it's so weird because we started the book as Edmond Dantes, who was this kind and innocent young man, no? And now we have the Count, he's like a snake, he's like a serpent. He's so creepy good, and he's so bad vibes. Like, he's rich, okay, and he's cool, and he's like, he knows so much, but he just feels rotten. He feels like a rotten human being. So click on the next video for chapter 23. That was chapter 22.